On today's episode, I'm going to make the head and the block friends again. Now, going back in time 10 minutes, I need to put the rear main seal on this before I put this on the engine stand. And to make that job easier, I've got the installation tool from Jazz Performance. You can buy this off of Boffy Racing. I'll put the link in the description down below, and I'll show you how to use it. Simply place the seal on the crank, making sure the inside hasn't folded out on itself. Use the tool, line up the bolt holes, and use the flywheel bolts themselves. Once you've wound the bolts in so they're only just touching the tool, you can do these up in a cross-like pattern and pull this seal down nice and evenly. When you can't tighten the bolts up anymore, you know the seal is all the way home and you can remove the bolts and tool. As you can see, it's made fairly easy work of this. Okay, so I had to go back and redo this as I found out the bolts bottomed out before the seal driver bottomed out. The seal driver should actually touch the crank right there, but it didn't, so I've just put some washers in there and pulled it in a little bit tighter. Now it should be sitting where it needs to be. Maybe in the future Jazz might actually bring out a different kit, maybe with different bolts and different washers to correct this problem. So now the block is on the engine stand, it's time to start things off, and that's by cleaning this face. Make sure there's no oil, no grit, no dirt on it at all. So I'm just going to take a rag and put some brake cleaner on the rag rather than blowing brake cleaner onto the block. Next is for the head location dowels, which go here and here on the exhaust side. You simply just press these in by hand. So on this engine, because hopefully I will be making more power, instead of using the old stretch bolts, I am going to be using ARP head stud kit. In this kit you get the stud, the washer and the nut, and a little bit of ARP assembly lube. The benefits of these are when you are running high horsepower, they could take a lot more strain to stop the head lifting away from the block. They are also reusable, unlike the old stretch bolts. So if you need to do a head gasket, nice and simple, you just take off the nut, leave the studs in, and they're good for years to come. So to put these in, make sure the Allen key side of it is facing upwards and the side that is blank is facing into the block. Pop a little bit of the supplied ARP lubricant on the stud that's going into the block. And just wind her in by hand. Now there is no torque settings for putting these studs into the head, but what you do want to do is take yourself an Allen key and make sure they are all the way down. Now these are a 3/16 Allen key hole in the head, so you won't be able to use a metric one for that, but just simply spin it until it bottoms out and give it a very, very gentle nip. no more than that. Now, when installing this head stud kit to this engine, don't be alarmed that the back 4 are all the same height and the top 2 are slightly higher. That is normal, and that is because the nut will sit higher up in the head when it's all together. So now they're all in, I'm going to go back over with some brake cleaner and a rag again, just to get off all the assembly lube that I did spill, and just make sure there's none where you've caught around the edge while putting the stud in. Now for the head gasket. I'm just using a standard BGA gasket, but if you are using a Cometic head gasket or other versions, be careful, as these 2 holes at the front are for the coolant to the head, and on the VVT model these are blanked off. And there are choices when you go to buy your Cometic head gasket. Also, don't fit these at 6 o'clock in the morning after a few drinks and put it on upside down, because it is possible. The way this actually goes on is with this elongated diagonal hole towards the intake side where all the oil pressure sensors sit. But it is possible to fit it backwards like this. When this happens, your oil and your coolant are going to go everywhere apart from where they should be. So make sure you fit it the right way around. Like that. You'll know it's right because this elongated diagonal hole has got the oil pressure hole in it. Now it's time to prepare the head, and we also want to make sure this surface is clean, dry and free of oil. So quick blast with brake cleaner and a rag. And then flip it over. When you are using the APR head studs, it's a very common issue that once you put the head onto the block, you can't put the washers onto the studs because it fouls on these castings. So after a little bit of research on the internet, it's easy to do. I've grabbed myself an Allen key, put the washer on the Allen key. I've also put a little bit of assembly grease on there to help the washer not move when I put the head onto the block. Pop the Allen key in where the stud would come up and drop the washer down into the head. Now hopefully that little bit of grease will stop it sliding about when I pick it up. Now to carefully lift the head onto the block, be careful of the nice new machined face on the head as to not scratch it on the studs. Now it's time for the head nuts. I'm going to try put a little bit of assembly lube on the stud that's protruding out. And then using a socket, guide the nut on. With the ARP kit, they do send you full instructions instructing you to tighten them up 3 equal steps to 65 foot-pound, which is just over 88 Newton meters, and they do tell you the order in which to torque them down in, so starting with 1, 2 and spiraling outwards. So I'm going to start off with 20 foot-pound. Working my way round and out. And then to 43 foot-pound. Now for the last step, I've had to get the big torque wrench out just to get that 85 foot-pound. Now what I'm going to do is undo them all in the opposite order, 180 degrees, and then repeat that 3-step process again. So I slackened everything off to give the studs a chance to settle down in the head and everything else to settle where it needs to be. This doesn't hurt at all, as these studs are reusable, and a lot of people make this common practice on this engine. Now whether you're going to leave the engine in this state overnight or over the period of a week, it's a very good idea to cover it up and block any holes, because now this is a sealed engine. If anything goes inside one of these holes, it's not going to come out without taking the head off. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.